Good morning, good morning, good morning. All right, welcome back, everyone. This is our sixth of seven coffee and conversations of the summer, and the ongoing conversation this morning is how is summer flying by so quickly, and I'm feeling it. So here we are on August 19th. Amazing. My name's Sean Keeley. I'm a COA graduate, and I am the director of the Summer Institute, and have a lot of fun putting these sessions together. Um, a lot of you know us well, but not every week there's some new folks in the audience. So I just want to take a quick moment to tell you a little bit about what College of the Atlantic is all about. So we're coming into our 54th academic year in September. Students are going to be back buzzing around this place in force here very, very soon. And we are a community of learners and doers. Um, we're about 350 undergrads these days, all pursuing a degree in human ecology. This is an interdisciplinary approach to education that we apply to all kinds of things we want to understand and ultimately improve in the world. So the Coffee and Conversation series fits really well with our human ecological approach, leaning into conversation each week. Throughout the summer, we bring a lot of people to campus who maybe don't know us that well or haven't been here, but we always try to protect one morning for an alum. And so this year, as we were kind of putting the program together, I reached out to Dan Farrenkopf here to my right, who is a 1993 graduate. I'm smiling because I had 1992 in my head, Dan. So 1993 grad, and is a well-known member of our community. He's a dear friend of mine, and so grateful, Dan, that you've joined us this morning. And when I reached out back in, I don't know, it might have been February or something, or January.
I said no.
First, Dan, yeah, I said no. Oh, no, you don't need to bring me in. But then he relented, and I said, well, who do you want to be in conversation with? Because we have the freedom to sort of design these as we like. And he pretty immediately said, oh, well, how about Jan Hartman? And I said, well, I know Jan. She's a longtime friend and supporter of COA. This sounds great. But I have to admit that I didn't quite see how the session itself would come together, because Dan is well known for his company Lunaform, which creates these beautiful garden vessels out of concrete. You can see one right here, and I hope the camera for the Zoom audience is catching that. Um, so beautiful works that complement landscapes and gardens here, there, and everywhere. And then Jan has this distinguished long-time career in editing and publishing, and then as recent as 2020, I believe, started Jan Hartman Books. And so she's collaborating with institutions and authors and really trying to create works that inspire and inform and enchant. And so there's some connectivity there. I mean, I can get there mentally, but it took a little bit of thinking. And Jan and Dan both assured me that the work that Lunaform does and the work that Jan you do in publishing does have it. There's enough there. So we created this session called Creating Craft and Print, and I am really looking forward to seeing how you two weave this story together. So I'm going to turn it over to you in just one moment, but I do want to mention a couple of things. If everyone could silence their cell phones, that would be great. And when we go to Q&A at the end, please do use the mic here and speak clearly into it for the Q&A session. And lastly, I just want to thank our incredible group of donors. COA donors really fuel what we're able to do here at COA, not only these summer events that people have come to really enjoy, but also the curriculum we offer in human ecology. Our students would not be here without all of you. So thanks so much to those who support COA. And if you don't, no worries, no shame, but there's time. You can certainly become a donor at any moment. So thank you all so much. I'm going to turn it over to Jan and to Dan, and thank you both for being here.
No, Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
As Sean mentioned, Dan is the owner and creator of Lunaform's beautiful vessels, often placed in cultivated landscapes. I'm the owner and founder of Jan Hartman Books, which through solo efforts and collaborations, I develop books from idea to print. Beautifully illustrated books on design, craft, and the natural world. And I've brought a collection today if you're interested. One factor that Dan's and my work have in common in creating craft and print is that our ideas evolve from a vision, a theme, whether it's the landscape or a place or a collection of buildings or written content. And I thought I'd start the conversation today by defining creativity. Creativity is defined as the use of the imagination or original ideas, especially in the production of an artistic work. Every creative endeavor starts with an idea. My husband, an architect, said the solution lies in the problem. And for a building, that certainly is one framework. For me, the development of an idea is more nebulous. It often develops from the written content and an author's dream. And that formation can be messy, which I'm accustomed to over 35 years, though many authors and clients struggle with the process.
Thank you, Jan. Design criteria is at the outset of every Lunaform project, a new form or an idea. Sometimes it's the dimension of a piece or a piece of ornament that the dimension it cannot exceed. And sometimes, like you said, it's more nebulous, a combination of the Lunaform palette of ideas, existing forms, and something suggested that might be entirely new.
In the case of the book I am discussing this morning, which is right behind me, the architectural monograph of Turnbull, Griffin, and Hasloop, the vision grew out of the two authors or architects' ethos about light and place, about the buildings they designed, and about the sources of their inspiration for each project. Response to sight and light is a key inspiration for them, inspired by Mary Griffin and Eric Hasloop's mentor and former partner, William Turnbull, one of the 20th century's most gifted designers who died at the young age of 62. Mary and Eric carried the architectural practice forward now almost 30 years later.
And speaking of 30 years, Lunaform has been steeping in garden vessels and in their place in gardens internationally for nearly as long. And I hope to describe this morning a few highlights of the last 18 months production. I will describe a few first and somewhat trying to keep the studio inspired and how our craft process continues to develop and the lessons learned along the way.
Book ideas stem from the vision, the theme, the source materials, the visuals, and the authors. I think few creative endeavors are done in isolation, such as life generally. Dan and I work in partnership with others. How does your vision for a vessel evolve? Wait a minute, turned the wrong page.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, as a maker tied to sort of a pottery tradition and design, we have many inspirations in contemporary clay and sculpture and architecture. Yun Kaneko, Shoji Hamada, Warren Mackenzie, and a Mengai kind of aesthetic or sensibility. This roughly translates to folk craft. And we've always sort of maintained that, even unknown to us in the naming of our studio 33 years ago, which was not for somebody, but like a collection. So it's basically functional art sort of for the people is sort of how we kind of have continued.
For my books, it's of course the author or client and perhaps an institution such as a college or a patron, a photographer and a graphic designer who come together to make the book. This may seem like a cast of thousands, and sometimes it feels that way. But the truth is that genuinely interesting books are created by a team of collaborators. In the case of the Turnbull Griffin Hasloop monograph, I worked closely with the authors who were my clients, Mary Griffin and Eric Hasloop in California, as well as the designer, Ben English, and the publisher, Rizzoli. How does your vision for vessels evolve?
Yeah, well, in a few recent commissions, it's usually starts with a conversation with the client. First, it's amazing that they sought us out. You know, maybe it's a pot seen from afar, or a neighbor's garden, or a photograph, or a love of concrete. And the first instance that comes to mind is some Opal architecture clients. We're in an Opal building right now. In Sedgwick, Sally and Crispin, they shared with me simply just a love of concrete when they started conversation. It may not have even known what we did, paving stones or something, but we shared concrete, and that started. And how it evolves a little bit. A friend of the studio, Tim Toole, a friend for over 10 years, he inspired us to make a film about 2 years ago, and that kind of stretched us a little bit. And then we have some unusual clients in resorts sometimes, not just homeowners and architects. And in one particular resort in Alice Beach, Florida, we've been incorporated into the town's sort of pattern language. And so we're in both shared amenity areas and private homes. What's another key element in the book's creating relating to partnerships, would you say?
I think for a book, it is often the author or the client or the featured makers, as in Handcrafted Maine, that's on the table. And Lunaform is featured in that book. And it's a collection of about 20 makers in Maine, and each of them very different, obviously with interesting personalities. And their stories really shaped the evolution of that book. And again, perhaps it's an institution or a patron, a photographer. I don't really do photography books, but it's a genre. And perhaps it stems from an editor, a designer, or a publisher. Not often, but occasionally publishers will have an idea of a book they want to do. And they, then they come to somebody who can put that together. And sometimes they hire an editor, but a book producer is, can do it soup to nuts. And unlike some endeavors, publishing is creative, and you adjust to the circumstance. So it's very fluid. For this featured book, in addition to the authors and architects, the project included the foreword by Paul Goldberger, the legendary New York Times architecture critic, as well as for the New Yorker, Vanity Fair, and others. Paul's foreword is ballet to the mind and ears. It's just lyrical. Also, there is the photographers who shot the 26 buildings in the book, essay contributors Donlin Linden, a revered architect, and gifted writer Daniel Gregory, both in California. The book designer, Benjamin English, in upstate New York, who I've worked with well over 20 years, as well as a copy editor and a proofreader. So that's a big team, and everybody kind of has to swing together. In addition, and very importantly, was the publisher Rizzoli USA in New York. And we had expected this book to be a custom publication to a niche audience. Yet Rizzoli fell in love with their work, and now you see the result. For Lunaform Pots, Dan, who are your partners?
Well, historically, it's been landscape architects principally, and homeowners now sort of in increasing numbers. We've had some rewarding partnerships in the last 18 months with the Rose Kennedy Greenway in Boston, the Boston's High Line, we were a part of a fabrication team for a sculpture that was realized by Lani Asuncion. She's a Boston-based artist. And then we've recently had a relationship with the De Cordova Museum in Lincoln, Mass, and also a commission of another artist's work, Evelyn Ridds. And some of Evelyn's images are behind us, or there's some big pieces and some of the realizing of that work. Yeah. Her work was part of the De Cordova's exhibit called Nature Sanctuary, and it was an outdoor exhibition that explored relationships between the natural world and ideas of home. And they were super varied. And they were site-inspired commissions and on loan by 6 women artists. I have a description of Evelyn's piece here. You might not be able to see it, but in one of these vessels, and it will cycle back through if you don't see it right now, there's an element above the vessel which may look like colored glass. And in fact, it is colored glass, and they're cupped hands. And cupped hands in gradient shades of blue glass cascade in a formation that suggests flowing water into an oversized vessel. That was ours. Evelyn Rids, but designed with Evelyn for sure, and colored with Evelyn. I think there's a picture of Evelyn in our studio. Evelyn Rids cast the hands of local environmental caretakers and those who have a special connection to water, including Flint's Ponds, which is adjacent to the sculpture garden. Flint's Pond is a protected reservoir and provides drinking water to the residents of Lincoln. And drawn to the diverse ways that people protect, the diverse ways that people pollute and access water, Rids named this sculpture Holding Water, as in the phrase that alludes to a kind of a truth-telling. In this case, about how water is sacred and necessary to all life, and yet clean water is not a given for so many. The glass hands are positioned in relationship to each other to suggest the passing of responsibility and knowledge across generations and among communities. The varying shades of blue of the glass and the vessel inspired by Rids' many photographs of the nearby water, which is constantly changing. It was a really fun commission to do. It brought some, we'll continue an edition. Some of our editions have been going for now 30 years. And to step outside of that, bring in a new manufacturer of how we're producing the forms, inviting the artist in for a few days. We had a reception for Evelyn. It was really fun, kind of energizes the studio, keeps the studio inspired. Yeah, it was a fun project. Yeah.
So another step for a book is defining the audience, whether a trade or an independent publication. You want to identify who the book is for, such as children by age or adults by interests or occupations, such as gardening, and then specify the sale and promotional opportunities, which in our media world is endless. And finally, you enumerate the volume of books that you think you can sell. This makes the math work, what we call a pro forma or not. Similar to forecasting the weather, 90% is wrong on most days. Editors and publishers specify the nature and enumerate the size of the audience and set the retail price. It sounds a bit like reading tea leaves, and actually, with few exceptions, it is. Sometimes the publisher has what's called a buy-in from an institution that helps to underwrite the publication, where they're buying a bulk number of books. Most of the time, though, books are published with a song and a prayer. This architectural monograph that you're seeing actually hits the bookstores in September, so we are still praying. Dan, for Lunaform Pots, how do you define and calibrate your audience?
I kind of wish we had a marketing arm, but, as many of you know here, the gardening atmosphere exactly here is quite competitive and robust. And nationally and internationally, we are fortunate also to have the lure of a Maine-made craft behind the studio. And this returns again and again, whether we are working in the Bay Area in California or a resort in Bahamas or a private estate in Costa Rica. But a kind of a critical step in kind of having a team and this marketing arm that I'm joking about is mentoring, kind of being in touch with the team that is out exterior, maybe has a fresh eyes on the studio. And so including mentoring and mentoring others. Again, this is a wonderful thread of the creative process and the ferment that's necessary. And also, again, opposite creation in isolation. but one must always acknowledge on whose shoulders this is all possible. And then Shoji Hamada's case, who I mentioned earlier, it was maybe Bernard Leach and some other Japanese makers, early 20th century. The Menge folk craft movement supported him. And in my case, a cast too numerous to do justice to. For sure, my advisors here at COA, Isabel Mancinelli, Ernie McMullen, Mark West, Martin Kopel, and immediately in the bustle of the architectural world, my good friend Patrick Chassé and John Danzer. And I take very seriously giving back for sure. One can never really repay your mentors. So I really enjoy the teaching that is part of my business, and that's how we kind of continue that. That's my marketing arm, sort of.
The actual development of the idea involves mapping or sketching out the idea and the themes and then the organization. And this takes some time. And for Dan, it would be the design and just thinking through what would be involved in the design and the all his necessary steps. And inevitably, it brings in the mentoring that is involved in creating craft or print. If you are lucky, you have an author or authors who are facile at developing and writing a book. Though even with the most experienced creators, many have never written a book before, a daunting prospect. If this is the case, the editor or book producer, such as myself, guides and mentors the author through the creation. This is very enjoyable with knowledgeable writers. It is painful when the author has a firm vision, yet no experience with creating a book. In recent years, I've had both. They both work out, though with different twists and turns along the way. And like most relationships, flexibility is key, as well as sticking to one's principles.
I applaud your flexibility and strength. And I imagine your network that you've developed, helps navigate like these twists and turns. And
yeah, the collaborators and relationships developed through individual projects and across one's career, which for me is, I think, at least 35 years, maybe it's even more, I shouldn't count. To this day, I know many people who I turn to for suggestions and specialized expertise. For one of my own books that I wrote, I turned to Dan's father-in-law, Mark Miter, a leading clinical psychologist in Maine, who is actually here today. Mark grew up in Springfield, Illinois, just a couple of blocks from the Lincoln home, a proximity that has inspired his own interest in research on Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln. Mark reviewed my manuscript for Lincoln's speechwriter, illuminating psychological insights about the productive relationship between the older Abraham Lincoln and the much younger John Hay, which are enlightening and bring depth to the book. And it's coming out in March. Mm-hmm. We all need help with expertise that others offer. These partnerships are invaluable to the creative process. And Dan, I think you've enjoyed some pretty amazing collaborations in your career.
Yeah, these twists and turns, it's hard to pull it off without a network. And beyond surrounding myself with very capable studio mates and assistants, Brian Pazarakis and Benaya Bailey are here, for instance, today. I've relied on regular phone calls with Patrick. And while we may not end up discussing the impetus or reason for me reaching out to him initially for our catch-ups, it would give me the confidence to get back into the studio. Patrick continued to remind us of our place in the gardening pottery continuum or ornament continuum, and that ornamental objects have been displayed in gardens throughout history: vessels, statues, containers, tablets. And they've served different roles, he would remind us, both spiritual and very practical containers. The venerable presence of an antique vessel that Patrick would be seeking out was not unlike Hamada's affinities towards a finish that was somehow natural, and what we've continued to really fine tune with our pieces. Um, the book design and printing is akin to seeing our concrete process through, and what some folks call our process is high touch. Um, after the collection of all these pieces, what's in the next bit for the books?
Okay, now we've finished the raw result. It's time to execute and produce our creation. Everybody's nervous during this time. For a book, we are at the end stage. We have a manuscript, probably images, artwork, and now the baby is ready to be birthed. This entails a design by a professional graphic designer, then printing, often these days in China. And the designer and printer are an essential key part of this team. We need to be compatible with the vision and the quality, and importantly, interactive communication. The idea that you turn a knob and the printer goes fluff, 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 that's not the way it works. You fine tune the color, you fine tune the varnish, you fine tune just everything you might imagine, and it's like open heart surgery. It's incredibly complicated, but also it's highly mechanized and it's doable. So I've been fortunate working with gifted designers and truly capable printers who work together and get results.
I keep imagining what kind of forward steps and backward steps, like in our process, what can you anticipate at these end stages? Like, are you ever sure of what percent done or average, or does it really vary?
We see everything.
Yeah.
We see every little
Yeah.
iteration so that we know exactly. In fact, I'm getting books delivered today, and I will know what that book looks like.
Yeah.
Because we've seen everything.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, those logistics are like
Critical.
Yeah, critical, and take a surprising amount of energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And time. So lastly, the lessons learned. You've done it, you've spent 2.5, 3 years. What'd you learn? Well, I'm a bit short-sighted right now, as I have 2 very complex books publishing this fall, one in September and one on November 1st. And in both cases, as with the architectural monograph, the end result is quite beautiful and inspiring. When you actually hold the book in your hand and you realize how solid it is and substantial and beautiful, it's a real high. I think one important lesson is to have a compatible team that works together, similar to a rowboat where everyone is pulling for the team and the vessel. Another lesson is to keep your expectations high. Shoot for the stars. Publishing is a subjective field which turns constantly and in unpredictable ways. Stay focused on the presentation for the book. And lastly, just to repeat, be flexible, respectful, and stay true to the vision. With this monograph, while the authors and I expected to have the book custom published, Eureka, we sold it to Rizzoli, a high honor for a relatively small architectural practice based in Northern California. Dan?
Well done. Well done. Well, a compatible team that works well together resonates with me. This morning, as I mentioned, Brian and Benai are here. Corin Baker has been with us all summer. Trisha Ballard helped us with some visuals, and without them and their attention and their intent, our vessels are impossible. They really are. And proposals now are easy to write with this team. We are building on successes and imagining pots that will likely leave our bodies very sore. But we intend to keep building on this. Yeah, and another link that we were discovering recently with print is that whole Mingai movement in the 20s spilled into Europe, spilled to North America. It was without print, it would have not been, those design ideas would have been lost, and the design ethos and aesthetic and sensibility, and we're very thankful for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I've wanted to do a Lunaform book for years, and maybe one day.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Dan.
yeah, yeah. We would welcome questions, Sean, with anybody.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Just gonna test the mic real quick. Oh, hi there.
Thank you very much. This is for Dan. Dan, I would like you to speak about the translation from your ceramic source material, you know, the forms, the clay body, the glazes, into ceramics. I'd like you to discuss that sort of translation from one material to another. And what are the advantages? What do you lose?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I spent so little time at the wheel or building with clay. I would love to have other people's ideas about this, but initially going from clay to concrete was just a challenge of sort of scaling up and achieving, you know, some scale that is really athletic, you know, in clay. Not impossible. I mean, this piece here was modeled after a Korean pot, a clay pot, possibly just coil built. Let's see. The elementally, maybe they're like the same stuff. It's silica, you know, principally, but and the glazes are really different. I don't know quite. Did I get some of your question? Part of it.
Sorry. So the source material is clearly ceramics. I mean, you mentioned
Right.
Warren McKenzie and other people.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're all great people, and having some traditional forms, whether it's Korean or from Crete or whatever.
Yeah.
So you're taking a form that was developed over time with a very specific ceramic history and a very particular cultural context, and you're moving it into another medium, I would assume, for scale issues, but also the ability to be outdoors and that sort of thing. And so I'm just kind of curious about some of your decision making about choosing a particular form, what works for you, and then, you know, the decisions that you make in terms of changing the surface. Like,
Gotcha.
okay.
On part of that, I can imagine some of our pots are more easily attributed to a civilization or a culture, and some are not. Some are kind of universals, and that we've been sort of gravitating towards the simplicity in our line. Over time, it seems like they're more universals lines. And sometimes when we develop a new form, it's just scaling up something that we've done before, or there's a dimension on site that we cannot exceed or we're aiming for. And then we might pull from our banks, you know, books and stuff, a line. It's really a tricky question to answer. I'm going to think on this a little bit more because some of them we don't prototype. We'll draw out flat and then start building the machinery to build it. And some can be real duds, the first copy or two, and then we kind of fine tune that line. And some of that is just redrawing and drawing. And for Evelyn's piece, she found a pot at the Peabody Museum that she drew on her studio wall. And just from a photograph of her studio wall, I drew it. And it was unlike any vessel we had made. It might look strange to some of you who are familiar with our line, but it's a gorgeous pot. And we really tightly dimensioned that piece because there was nothing wrong with it. You know, in the, did I get closer? Sorry. Mostly I don't think about it, but yeah. Oh, right.
Hi, you partially just answered my first question, but the other question I have is when you start the process, how long does it take to develop a pot? And then am I to assume it's always done in your studio because you were mentioning the Bay Area? I mean, are they ever developed outside of your studio? I just wondered how long the process takes.
Yeah, if it's an existing form that's on our palette, so to speak, any one piece is with us for at least 30 days. That includes a curing time, possibly building forms, building up, breaking down forms. we make everything in Maine here in Sullivan. We have toyed with the idea, and we've made some proposals when a piece is exceeded what a flatbed can travel with without lead cars. So there was a 13-foot commission that we had built done a proposal for, and that the logistics started to go beyond what the scope was, basically. So that wasn't realized yet. And sometimes these kind of boomerang back to us. And then it is interesting, and we tried this rapid prototyping using some CNC machinery. That the CNC cutting was done out of our studio, but assembled in our studio. So we can kind of see exporting bits and exporting crew to build. But for now, anyway, for the next little bit, it will be done in Maine. Yeah. 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 Thank you.
Up here.
I had a question about, I guess what I'm sort of labeling a legacy of stewardship. And thinking about when it leaves Sullivan, and the idea that I think some of the early pots were utilitarian. There was a utility to them as well as a beauty and a craft and everything else. And so when it leaves Sullivan and it goes to an owner, then what goes with it for care and feeding? Because
That's a
um,
good
you know,
example.
is it sustainable? And what's your relationship with a pot that has gone to a place and you're proud of it, but somehow it got broken?
Yeah, this is a great. I want to turn this over to Brian, but he's saying no. Usually, the last time we see a piece is on our loading dock. We're creating it. It goes to whoever. In this case, this is Jan's pot here, and it did come back to us because we think a bear may have toppled this fella, and
It stood in the woods, and we think a bear it was early in the season, and a bear was just trying to see what was in the pot.
yeah, looking for grubs. So care instructions definitely go out with the pieces, like winter care here in the Northeast. You wouldn't want a piece like this to fill up with water and freeze. But if it was topped with soil, a really well-drained soil, even a really saturated, muddy soil can't compromise the steel that's within these. But we get pieces back occasionally to fix them. We don't really do on-site repairs. It's just not effective. It's just they need to be in our environment to kind of work on. And some people are up for it, and some people leave a nick or a chip in them. And that kind of breaks our hearts a little bit when we know they're not cared for, but for the most part, they are. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question about, you mentioned your mentors, and I wanted to ask you about COA and coming here and how the college influenced you and your business.
Yeah, I moved here when I was 17, and I think the first week I was here, I was in Thuya Gardens with Peter Owen's design group, looking at this pot in Thuya Gardens that was 100 years old. Maybe it stayed in my background a little bit. The park and the landscape of Maine and the proximity that COA puts, its few students in with professionals, I think probably led to that meeting with Patrick shortly before going to Russia. And I think in a larger community, those kind of chance encounters might be more difficult. So when I was here, we were on a good term. We were maybe breaking 200 students. So people, we kind of, if you weren't falling through the cracks, which is totally possible because it was very self-designed, you're often put next to folks and mentors or professors that kind of cared a little bit. So the scale, I would say, maybe the natural resources around here, pretty inspiring. Definitely the robust gardens that saw immediately. Yeah.
Up in the front.
Hi,
Hey,
Dan.
neighbor.
People don't know what your senior project was. And it doesn't have anything to do with pots, or maybe it does, I'm not sure. Um, um, how do you actually fabricate your pots?
Yeah.
Vessels,
Yeah.
not pots
Yeah.
anymore, than vessels.
Good question. We, unlike a clay pot that started and finished on a wheel, we start with false work. And in this case, it's made inverted to its display orientation. And there's a tapered cylinder that's sort of like a sharp ellipse. And we build on top of that. And then we lift the concrete from the form and then reassemble the form. So it's not too dissimilar to like a clay jig process, which I did right here, in the pottery, where you either start with a formed plaster bat or some sort of collapsible core that you're building on, or gluing two bowls together to create a closed form with clay. So that is how our strategy for making these tapered cylinders and tapered ellipses. To make the piece that Evelyn's at there, we start with a mold. There's our metal bender that's making basically our concrete trowel. And the individual form on the side there was a rib, like those in series connected top and bottom to like a cog are like false work. And we build on top of that. And the ribs that you see in that previous photograph, those are small enough to then be taken out of the finished piece and then reassembled for another copy. And some of the photographs might make more sense knowing that. There was a picture of Cody and I was scratching some horizontal lines into the concrete, and that was to create a little seat for the steel reinforcing that goes into them. Another good pot.
It's a great pot.
Yeah. It was concrete pots. With Ernie McMullen and Isabel Mancinelli and Martin Kopel as advisors. Isabel, I was handing drawings to. Ernie, I was mixing concrete for. Martin was just a great company. I made a 30-inch bowl that was a reproduction of a piece at the Azalea Gardens, a tapered cylinder pot that was a design of Patrick's, and then a bird bath, I think, a bird bath that was also a reproduction bird bath. I think that's it, but yeah, that was a long time ago.
Hi. So when you decided, or how did you decide to become a book publisher, a book creator? What was the impetus? How did you start?
I spent many, many years as an editor for a publishing house. And I had some programs, and I did that. And as time went on, I did more and more. When you're in a publishing house, they have what's called an editorial board. And so you bring projects to the editorial board, and sometimes they fly, and many times they don't. So you're an editor in a house is subject to the kind of the interests of I wouldn't say publisher so much as a collective of the editorial vision. And when I left the publishing house, I thought, what do I want to do? And immediately I said, I want to produce books from beginning to end, and work directly with the people, and then sell it to a publisher, and that's what I do. So it's just it was really a natural extension of being an editor. At one point I was also a publisher, and so I just it's very satisfying. It has its bumps for sure. Everything does, but it's good. And I also can create projects and then take them to a publisher, and they say, yes, I want to do this. So, and then having good relationships with the publishers helps. That answer the question?
A voracious reader and
Oh
consumer
my
of
goodness,
books.
I love to read.
Yeah.
Hi, Dan. I love, 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 love what you're doing. I just wanted to know, since I'm a collector, my house is very eclectic of ceramics, pottery. And what is that size wouldn't fit in? What is the small, I know you're known for your scale and your vessels. What is the smallest size that would fit into a house or their studio?
Well, it's really
Very-
up to the house, isn't it?
Yes.
Very protective of what I've
Yeah.
got, and I'm afraid
Yeah.
to leave it outside.
We are currently working from about 40 pounds, 11 inches tall, to 66 inches is a recent commission, but we can be bigger. We have a 10-foot vessel that we produce fairly regularly. That's super challenging. And many of their pieces are interior pieces. Like those same pieces are interior, exterior. Yeah. 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 Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Good morning.
Good
I was
morning.
interested when you talked about publishing books, how in the end, it's a prayer and a hope and everyone's nervous.
Yep,
You gave credit to the design and printing.
yeah.
So when you think about the spacing and the font and the type of paper and the color, I'd love to hear you elaborate on it. And I'm sure never a project of yours, but have you seen cases where you're holding the book and think, oh, this could be better or should have been this? When is it too late to make those changes in the process?
During the printing process, the printing process has many stages. And the first thing they do is they test the art. They test the images for color and saturation. We look at papers. You know, we spend a lot of time looking at all the different papers. And then, you know, once it's set on how to print for an image, then we print sample pages and we look at those. And maybe it doesn't have a varnish. A varnish is a very fine, it's a very fine coating that helps to lift up the color in some cases. But that do you want it matte? Do you want it glossy? You know, do you want it yellow? Do you want it brown? So, I mean, a lot of decisions along the way. What the best projects and the best printers are with you each incremental step. And to the point that you get a dummy book and it has the case and it has the paper and that's it. So that you're holding the book in your hand but you're not looking at anything, but you're looking at the paper and the quality of the paper and how that feels and how weighty it is. And then, and then you see a sample of the cover. And the cover is kind of dicey because everybody has a vision of what the cover should look like and how bright it should be or how understated it should be. And then they send us a sample book. That's not the final, because there's still some more tweaking that happens. You know, one thing I want is to have a flat opening. You know, you don't want a book with images that, you know, kind of accordions together. And then the books I'm receiving today are the final books, but the advanced copies. And so it's taken, where are we? We're in August. It's taken 8 months through that process. That makes sense? Good.
There's a lot of turnaround points, aren't
There's
there?
tremendous amount of turnaround points.
Design.
And like I mentioned, most publishers these days print in China because you get the best quality and the best cost. And thankfully, books are not going to be covered by the tariffs. Yeah. Um, and so, but the international express system, we think of it as FedEx or whatever, it is fast. So you're not waiting weeks to get a book. It gets there literally in a day or two. So it's all very, very fast. And UPS International costs less than UPS Domestic.
That's great. I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment, but I have one to lob. Okay, I'm gonna ask a quick question, and then I'll over to you. Dan, I'm thinking about your business, and I think you said maybe 33 years ago you guys got started, and I'm kind of curious, like a day in the life a little bit, because the creative process, I think, just knowing you a little bit for you is really important, but you're also running a substantial business, and there's all those decisions that need to be made. And I'm curious about the distribution of your energy and focus as a, as the lead at Lunaform, and how much creative process, how much business details. I'm just curious about that distribution.
Yeah, I could do a day in the life of the last couple weeks or so, looking at Brian and Benaya. Um, yeah, each day starts in the studio. It's always in the studio, and we're sanding. We're hand sanding, and then making a mix plan with Brian or Benaya, like what's sort of on the dock. And it really starts on Monday, where we're breaking down the previous week's work, set and deciding what's to build, and sanding. Did I mention sanding? Yeah. And then I might go into another building and wait for a phone call. And then in between, I'll do some sanding. And um, about 20% of our week, besides like working each step on a particular piece like this, we do proposals for work. We're in touch with freight companies. And sometimes those logistics, just the freight logistics, are 20% of what we do. This might kind of talk to it a little bit. And then 70% is actual, just kind of sweating it out, getting super grubby, making enormous messes. And there's not a lot of like cultivation time. It's what did we decide 4 months ago that we were working on? And in that 4 months, sometimes from a commission, there's something maybe in the background of Brian's mind or my mind, where how is this going to happen? And when it's on the table, it has our focus for those 5 or 6 days of building, and then as many as 10 to 15 days in the coloring studio. And in each of those sort of 24-hour increments, decisions are made, but it's usually our hands and eyes that are kind of running through it. We're now at a point where the supplies, we just know the increments and when to order, and things are on hand. We're not running out, to get things. And that's, I'm so fortunate to have the folks that work with us. There are eyes on the supplies and eyes on where my attention needs to be, and each other's. How's that? Like, did I mention sanding? Yeah,
that's
still
great.
sanding.
Right here.
I was interested in the fabrication that's occurring with the artist who's standing on a little barrel
Yeah.
and pouring something in. What is going on
Yeah,
there?
that's one of the final steps of Evelyn's piece, and that's Evelyn Ridds. She's a Boston-based artist, and we realized her sculpture with her. We were the concrete arm, and then there was the steel fabrication, and there's the glass fabrication. And what we invited Evelyn to do was to etch a bronze surface that we put on it. In her particular piece, the concrete steps were first gray, like a matte gray, kind of like our floor here, where most everything starts. And then they were a charcoal gray as a good ground color. And then they were primed to accept a Ben Moore paint, which was blue. And then that was primed to accept a metal paint, which was bronze, actual bronze suspended in an acrylic medium. And we usually do one thin film of bronze, and then we'll do 24 hours later, we'll do another thin film and we'll etch it. And that is a cup, a yogurt cup of acid that she's pouring on it. It's a mild acid solution, kind of like similar molar strength to like vinegar or something, but it immediately reacts with the bronze. And while the acrylic medium is still wet, it can oxidize. Like this one here, this is bronze, and the striations, the vertical striations are from a pore of a solution. And then once the paint is dry, it's sort of healed over and it doesn't continue to oxidize. Yeah, I like these technical questions, these are easier. And then Jan's piece here has also some clear furniture wax on it too, and that kind of deepens the surface a bit. Yeah, so a lot of steps. Yeah, sanding too.
Wonderful. Why don't we'll take one more. Here you go.
Hey, Dan. So you've
Steve,
been
good
mentioning,
to see you.
yeah, your eyes and ears, and you've also been mentioning lots of sandings and various pigments and some weak acid and so forth. So what do you do to protect yourselves and your staff from possible physiological insults?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, we're pretty particular, pretty nerdy about the gear that we have on, the PPE, and if someone's new, they're immediately issued gloves, and they know where to get a second and third and fourth pair of gloves. We have respirators too. Often, most of our days with a paper mask with an exhale respirator that has a nose bit and a good gasket seal. And we've found some great things that fit most everybody, but we take some time to fit people. Both of our buildings, actually we have several buildings, but both of our principal kind of fabrication areas are pretty leaky. They're not super tight buildings with, good exhaust. For some of the more dusty things, we have a little cabinet with hoods and stuff. So we're nerdy both about the rigging of moving heavy objects and really particular and slow, and we narrate those steps with each other as we're going, and it's just how we set the tone to do things slow. Even this piece, this is over 200 pounds and would not find a toe really all that too. Yeah. I had another thought about that. Oh, someone mentioned sanding over here, but we don't mechanically sand most things. It's super lo-fi cloth-backed paper, so the gravity is taking most of it straight down. When we do have to tool a piece with an angle grinder or belt sander, things like that, can be done outside or in a room with a hood. Yep. So the mechanical sanding is treated really differently, and we've evolved to do most of this hand sanding because we also know that our eyes are making choices, and we can we're going at a human pace for that. It works so far for us. But thanks, Steve. Good to see you.
Great. Well, thank you both. That was really fascinating, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll just quickly mention, Jan pointed out earlier that there's a number of publications, a number of books on that back table that you can see some of her work. Obviously, the Lunaform piece in the front. And next week, please come back on Tuesday, same bat channel, same bat place, and we will be having our final conversation of the season. Suzanne Morse, faculty member here, will be interviewing Tom and Sue Stuart Smith, who are coming over from the UK. They'll be here talking about their project, the Serge Hill project, as well as Sue's book called The Well-Gardened Mind. So please come back next Tuesday. Thank you all, and thank you, Dan and Jan. This is really wonderful.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Sue.